common defense policy of the African Union, but I think we are very, very far away from that point, because what you find is many nation states within Africa still behave as very autonomous, independent entities. Even though the African Union exists, I would say that African unity does not yet exist to a certain extent. Now, this African peace and security architecture that we keep talking about really flows from that protocol establishing the Peace and Security Council. So the PSC is the focal, if you will, the focal point of this architecture. Additional institutions include the African Standby Force, the Panel of the Wise, the Military Staff Committee, the Continental Early Warning System, and a peace fund. And I will just very briefly now talk about where we are in terms of some of these institutions. In terms of a graphic representation of how this all fits in, I'm not sure if it's very clear from where you are, but at the very top of this peace and security architecture would be the Assembly of Heads of State of the African Union. And the PSC can meet at that level of heads of state. It can also meet at the level of ministers, but the practice is that it regularly meets at the level of ambassadors or permanent representatives in Addis Ababa. And they're permanently based there, and they can meet within a number of days, if you will, if necessary, to respond to a situation. The Council is supported by the African Union Commission, which essentially is the secretariat that implements the decisions of the Council. And then you can see how the other components of the African Peace and Security Architecture fit into the framework. The Staff Committee, Standby Force, Panel of the Wise, and the Early Warning System, and the Peace Fund. So that's a very basic graphic representation, if you will, of this APSA. The PSC, as I said, is the cornerstone of APSA. The current members of the PSC are Benin, Burundi, Chad, Cote d'Ivoire, Djibouti, Mali, Mauritania, Namibia, Rwanda, and South Africa, who will serve for a period of 2 years. And for a period of 3 years, we'll have Equatorial Guinea, Kenya, Libya, and Nigeria, and Zimbabwe. And you could very well question why are some of those countries in the Peace and Security Council when within their own borders, if you will, they have crises. This is a function of the politics of the African Union and the regional rotation of membership. It seems to be a contradiction, but it is the reality that we actually have to live with. The PSC was established in 2004 in terms of its first set of meetings. It has held over 250 meetings, and these are held regularly, monthly, weekly basis as required, has issued a wide range of communiques, reports, statements, and has deployed 4 official peace support operations. In 2003, it intervened in Burundi to stabilize the situation there, which was in danger of escalating into an even more volatile conflict. But subsequently, it handed over to the United Nations. So that was AMIB in 2003. In 2004, it intervened in Darfur because, again, of the crisis there. And subsequently, now there is a joint United Nations African Union mission in Darfur. In 2007, it intervened in Somalia, and now is faced with tremendous challenges of trying to manage a very volatile situation. And one of the less known interventions was in Comoros, where it intervened to essentially stabilize an electoral process, but effectively ended up enforcing, if you will, some degree of peace. All of these missions have been confronted by a range of challenges: capacity, logistics, professional training of the actual troops that are deployed. These are recurring challenges, and they currently are confronting and undermining the effect, the ability of the AU to deploy effective missions. Very briefly, to talk about the key components of the African peace and security architecture, the standby force is conceived as a force that will deploy rapidly at an early stage to prevent, again, the situations, the crimes, the war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide that might transpire. And its mandate is prepared and approved of by the PSC, either at the level of ministers or at the level of heads of state. And it is a standby arrangement, which means it is supposed to be permanently stationed and able to undertake peace support operations, particularly to support preventive diplomacy, peacemaking, humanitarian intervention, peacekeeping, peace enforcement, and also peace building. The timeline for the operationalization or for the establishment of the ASF was by 2006 to already have a planning element for the management of political missions, to be able to co-deploy AU observer missions within a short moment of time. And in October this year, literally last month, the AU conducted its rehearsal of ASF deployment exercise. And I believe General Joanna was involved or at least participated in that initiative. It assessed the AU's aptitude to manage complex missions. Basically, it conducted a simulation of an intervention in a fictitious country to assess whether the AU would be able to effectively deploy. Despite delays, the ASF is supposed to have been operational by this stage, but it is not, and there are some delays, and there are also quite a number of major challenges. So it will be a few years before one could say that it is fully operational. In terms of the panel of the wise, what this panel of the wise is, you probably heard yesterday about the Council of the Wise within ECOWAS. The Council of the Wise perhaps is a better kind of terminology. The panel of the wise is a group of distinguished African men and women who were appointed by the African Union heads of state to undertake preventive diplomacy, international Pan-African mediation, if you will, within the African continent. And this entity has been operational since 2007. But again, there are some political considerations where certain powerful member states within the African Union do not necessarily want to see a very proactive and interventionist panel of the wise. So it has had its hands tied to a certain extent. There's a new group of members that have been appointed in the last summit of the African Union in July in Kampala. And this group will begin working in January. And the intention is perhaps to have a more interventionist, but also a panel that will prevent crises from escalating to situations where they become unmanageable. So I think what we have is very small steps towards goals, and we're not quite there yet. And this panel will meet for the first time, the new panel will meet for the first time in January 2011 in Addis Ababa. The Military Staff Committee is essentially all the members of the Peace and Security Council, the 15 members of the Peace and Security Council, have defense advisors or defense attaches who are based in Addis Ababa. And these defense attaches are supposed to provide the Peace and Security Council with advice on the military dimensions of any interventions, or the military aspects of any interventions. So the staff committee does exist, but again there are problems of having sufficient number of defense attaches in Addis Ababa to convene effective military staff committee meetings. So the meetings of the staff committee are often not very well attended, and they also require a certain degree of capacity building. Here's where the lessons learned from the United Nations Military Staff Committee, the Security Council, and also the EU Political Security Committee could be very informative in terms of how to enable the military staff advisors to work closely with ambassadors and the civilian leadership. The Continental Early Warning System, again, is also a work in progress. The basic systems are in place. A detailed roadmap exists. This was finalized early in 2006. The modalities for how this early warning system works have been established. Communication lines, though, with other organs of the AU are not as effective as they should be. And the Continental Early Warning System now has a memorandum of understanding with all the regional early warning systems, the ECOWAS, SADC, IGAD,